Welcome, everybody. This is LPC Chris from the podcast, hashtag Getneckidtherapist. And today's guest I have is the author of Riding the Waves of Grief, Miss Frieda Ferrick.
You are.
Listen up.
Okay. Hi, my name is Frieda Ferrick. I am a therapist in Santa Rosa, California. And when I was an intern in 1990, I knew I wanted to do something with working with grief because I had experienced being with my father when he died 10 years earlier. And I knew I was going to do something with that experience. It was so profound. My mother and my sister and I were around his bed when he passed. And it actually helped me not to be so afraid of death. And a realization, we're all going to experience. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're rich and famous. I don't care if you're poor. I don't care what color, race. We human beings are all going to experience grief and loss in our lives.
Yeah.
But some people have more of a cushion than others. Wow. That's only difference, really. Yeah. So that's how I got involved with grief and loss. And so I do other work in therapy, but people do find me because I've sat with many people who have had a death in the family, a death of a child, a spouse. I have had siblings, and they're just hurting people that needs a safe place to talk about it and not feel rushed with their grief.
Right. It's a huge
thing. As a survivor, you know that. It's a place to talk.
Yeah, definitely. So you have worked not only in your own family seeing death, but working with Alive Hospice. So tell me about that process and tell me about that work.
Okay, so I was an intern in 1990, and I took an internship at a local hospice. At that time, it was only hospice in Santa Rosa. It was a wonderful experience because it taught me to just be with the person, not to go ahead of them, not to go behind them, but just to walk side by side with them as they went through their grieving process. So I actually had individual clients from hospice that had experienced death. And I also started to facilitate groups. So I did 3 groups when I was an intern. Then I took a little break. And then when I got licensed, I said, I can do a group for you. This is all volunteer. So I started doing different groups for them. So I did 6 other groups over the 10-year period. From 1990 to 2000, I facilitated 9 different grief groups. Some of them were like I did parents who've lost a child twice a year each time. And I did a survivors of suicide group for 20 months every week. And children, I did a children's group when I was an intern. So, that's been my, that's my love. I love all the work I do with all kinds of clients, but I think that was my calling to work, just to be with people.
In that time of their lives, transition.
Right.
And then those who are left behind.
Yes, those who are left behind. Yeah, because the ones who are transitioned, we don't know exactly what happens, but we all have our belief system, and I believe that they're in a happy place. But people behind aren't, and we can't rush them. We can't rush them through their process to get to that place of acceptance. They have to go through their own. It's a timing thing, and we're all different.
Yeah. We are all different. I'm glad you said that. I think in the Christian faith, we don't give ourselves permission to give ourselves time to grieve, time to feel sad, because it's looked down upon that you are sad. Like it's less of a faith walk if you're emoting or if you're even mad. And we don't give people that permission in the Christian faith. And I think even as a minority, we don't give that grace because we are going through grief.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't help to have someone tell you that you're, ask you, when will you be over it? Or questions like that are more hurtful than helpful. You don't get over a loss. If you love someone like you loved your sister,
Yeah.
it's not like gone from your heart. She's there always. You know, you might not think of her intensely all the time, but she's part of who you are and part of your history.
Right. Definitely.
You know,
In my case, it was a brother, but
oh, a brother, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. But somebody out here is getting this information, so it's talking directly to them as well. But yeah, you don't forget ever that they existed and that you love them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I also learned about that from my parents because they had lost I wonder how could they have been decent human beings and my mother was in the Lodz ghetto and her dad died in the room where she and her mother and two sisters were. One brother died in the Warsaw Uprising, and then her mother and two sisters were rounded up when she was at her fiance's room for a night or two when she was ill. And when she came back, they were gone. She never saw them again. So there was no closure, nothing. And the same thing with my father. He had a wife and two little girls, 5 and 12, and they were murdered. So this is what I grew up with, and I think coming here to this country as a baby, and then I became a citizen where I witnessed my parents becoming a citizen. I think it's given me such compassion for people in this country who suffer so much. Like it's a whole bunch of people, but the Native Americans and Afro-Americans. I can't stand it when there's injustice and harm done because targeting a group is wrong. And it's just I feel like I could cry. It's just so awful. And my parents thought America would be a Mecca. And in the 1960s, when they saw trying to get votes and being, harmed, killed or harmed, they didn't know what to think. They thought this is America. And they just were so aghast. They didn't know what to do with their thoughts and feelings. But anyway, I'm digressing, but it all is part of who I am and my experience. Technically I'm an immigrant, I wasn't born here, and anyway, so I feel like we're all in this together. And if we can help one another and be kind and just be there without talking a lot to people in grief, just let them talk and just say, things like, this must be hard on you and I'm so sorry. And, instead of telling them, get over it, or you'll get over it, or move on, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And even if you're religious, when people die, you don't want them to say right away, someone you love dies, you don't want them to say right away that they're in a better place, because you're not ready for that. You'll come to that in your own time. But, so I'm just, as you can tell, I'm passionate about that.
And I love it.
Then yeah. And so in August, with the help of the woman who helped me put this out on Amazon, I put together all my poetry about grief and loss and a couple of blogs.
Yes.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate you sending me your book of poems. And when I got it, I was excited. And then when I opened it up, I was not expecting that you wrote in it. And I appreciate this because it's speaking to where we are in our country and even in our world, because we are still in a pandemic. We've lost a lot of friends, people who are listening, lost friends, the loved ones, or if you didn't lose anybody, someone who died, of someone who died. So I want to say I appreciate you for writing in here. And I think more now than ever, grief and loss has become my passion. At first it wasn't. If you had told me a couple of years ago about working with people in grief, I would have said no. Mm-hmm. I'm working with children only. We're working with this, we're working with that. And then 2020 came, the first part of 2021, And then I started having dreams about talking to people one-on-one about loss and one-on-one about feeling lonely and isolated. And it just kept kept dreaming and working with me. And I was like, oh, this is something that I'm supposed to be doing. Grief and loss is something that I know how it feels to grieve and loss. And then children grieve all the time and we don't acknowledge it. Adults are grieving all the time and we don't acknowledge it. So yeah, I love that you sent me this, and had been following you on Facebook for it might be a year. I'm not sure how long it's been, but
Not sure either.
yeah, I don't know. I just know you were there, and and I started reading your posts. So once I start reading your posts, I was thinking, she has poems, she has a story, and then a lot of her poems are about grief and her family. So I want to talk to her one day and see what her story is and how much she would share with me.
Mm-hmm.
So
And here we are.
Yes, I'm so glad and I'm thankful. Of all these poems that you've written, which one might be your favorite?
That's a hard one, but it might be the one at the beginning about, let me put my glasses on so I can see. It might be the first one in part one, grieving.
Okay.
As you yeah, that one.
Okay, can you read that one?
Yeah, I could.
Thank you.
Thank you. Grieving. As you travel down this road of grief, take your water bottle with you, for you will not know how long this journey will take. As you travel down the road of grief, nothing will make sense. The days will be long, the nights longer. Carry a soft blanket with you. You will hear the voices of your family and friends from afar. It will be a distant whisper as you travel down this road of grief. As much as you desperately hope there will be shortcuts, you will find none, nor any detours to be found. Sorrow wells up and the tears will come until you feel that your heart has cracked open. One day you will wake up, and even though your journey is not over, you will realize that you are slowly but surely returning to life.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. This is powerful. I had to sit there for a moment and just kind of reflect on that, because it does speak to that journey. And I do a grief recovery group with my church on Sundays, and we talk about leaning into your grief, and giving yourself grace. And then that last part with one day you'll wake up, and even though the journey is not over, you will realize that you are slowly but surely returning to life. And sometimes it's like you don't realize when that happens. You just all of a sudden, like you said in your poem, just all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, it doesn't feel as heavy today. Or it doesn't, I don't remember when I felt that elephant or that pressure on my chest,
Mm-hmm.
on my shoulders, or on my back. So yes. Where were you in your journey when you wrote this?
That's a good question. Let's see, I wrote that a couple years ago. It was, my father died in 1980. He died of cancer. And then my mother died at a much older age, but she was quite a bit younger than him in 2010. And it was a couple years after her death. I can't remember it was probably about 2016 that I wrote that. I can't even remember. And, I just doing the work and, losing your parents. And even though, especially with my mom, she was ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to let go of her, and we did. But we were we weren't with her. I was at my sister's and she died during the night. She had hospice by then. So I think it's probably there, but I had already stopped doing the grief groups, and but I get calls periodically from referrals from hospice asking if I can work with somebody, and I try to squeeze them in because I want to be there for them.
Yeah. Yes. And so you had your parents pass, and you have had some siblings pass as well, right?
No, I only have one sister, and she's still alive. She's
Okay.
she's got Parkinson's, so she's been, she's there mentally, but her body is really having a hard time. So she has even expressing herself, but she was just a light in my life, my big sister, and so she's still there, and she participates as she can, but she just has a lot of physical struggles now. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I misspoke. I'm sorry. But
No, hey,
yeah.
no worries. And I think the main thing with my grief is I feel like I was a witness growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And even though my parents tried not to burden us with their pain, and they really tried, as much as they could, but I'm sure it spilled over. And so I was a witness to people who had tremendous losses. And so I think that impacted me too. And maybe partly of how I became a counselor, because I was an observer. I didn't speak a lot when I was little. I wasn't a talker. Now I can talk.
Me too.
But so we're watching on. So maybe we observers become therapists. Who knows? Yeah.
I think so. And with you observing your parents, and I know they trying to hide all of that pain from you. As a young observer, what did you see?
Well, it's like my sister and I knew something was wrong instinctively without words. Like if I had a nightmare, I crawled into her bed, or she crawled in. We knew, and we comforted each other. Somehow we knew not to kind of push our parents too much. And it was done without words. Like I in one of my poems about the Holocaust, I write about my sister and I were junior detectives putting together one piece at a time of this puzzle, because little things would come out and we'd learn a little bit more, but it never was the full picture until we were adults. I interviewed in 2 different interviews, and then we heard more. And my dad was dead by then, so I didn't ever get his complete story, but I got some of it.
Okay. So
they
didn't tell you. They didn't tell you everything.
No, they didn't. They really didn't tell us until we were adults. Like I said, we got little pieces. We knew. Like I found, when I was about 7 or 8, I found a picture of a woman. And I said, "Who is this?" I found it in there, and there was one picture of this woman, and my mother and father were looking at each other, and it was my dad's first wife, who had been murdered in World War II. So they looked at each other, and they finally said, "This was your dad's first." He was married before. And then, of course, that opens up for a kid. Yeah. What? You were married other than my mother,
right?
And little by little, we got little stories.
Yeah, and that your dad had other children, and
well,
taken.
Yeah, that has been very. When I was an adult, I finally put it together. Those were my half sisters. Those were dad's daughters. They were 5 and 12 when they died. The 5-year-old was born in 1939, so she never knew anything else but war. And my older half sister, at least she had 7 years before the war of having more of a normal life. And then at 7 years old, things got shut down. And from 7 to 12, she was first in the ghetto and then in a concentration camp. Yeah. So you could see how loss would be in my bloodstream.
Yeah.
Our histories, like your history. Yeah. I'm sure you amazing history from your families, from both sides, you know?
Definitely do. I just realized, and I'll have my mom on the podcast later on in season 4, but we'll talk about our history and her last name and how we have really been resilient through a lot of struggles, a lot of family struggles, poverty, abandonment, neglect, all of that. And yeah, it is something that shapes us even before we even come into this world.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah. And we now talk about epigenetics when you're doing brain, when you're studying brain in children and how they respond to trauma, and being cognizant of that in education now and in therapy world. And that is so true. And I see it with you because you and your sister had an unspoken language and understanding that you didn't want to stress out your parents too much with nightmares. You could just lean on each other and be each
That's
other's
right.
companion.
Hmm. You
Yeah.
you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Y'all just knew. You just knew. And that's some of the studies that are now out, and it's pretty newer compared to where we were in this field or even in education like 20, 30 years ago. Nobody was really talking about it. They may have been studying it, but nobody was having that conversation and saying, yes, this is valid. And when you talk about children of war, even though they weren't not in the war, it was still affected by that. You all were still affected by all of
Right.
these events. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so heartbreaking to see children all in different countries, in our country, but also in other countries, suffering the impact of wars and famines and drought and just very difficult living conditions. You know, yeah, because then how are they going to make a life for themselves and their children? You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now that you saw your parent or heard their stories, and then your parent and grandparent, how has
Yeah.
that translated over to your family?
Well, okay, so I married somebody who, John, I've been married to him for 50 years and we're still married. It's,
Yay.
and he has a different background. He comes from he's half Irish and the other half is like German and Belgium and some other countries. So he has a different background. But my kids are, they were pretty young when they heard my mom's story, and we saw a videotape of her being interviewed, and they just rushed over to her and just hugged her. And I think they carried that history. It's my dad died when they were pretty young, but my mom was around for them until they were adults, so they've really loved her a lot and listened to her, and she was a force in her own right. She was oh my God, she was a strong woman.
Yeah, and had to be. She was so
Yeah.
young to go through so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how, and I know that we are learning to treat grief differently in this day and age. How did your parents learn to handle grief?
Well, that's a real interesting question, because I think what happened for them is that they were more in survival mode. First they were moving around in Europe, and I'm not going to go into, it's too long of a story, but then they came to America and they were so busy. They had to learn a language, they had to learn the customs. They went to night school to learn English. My father had to get a job so they could have some money coming in. They had a little bit of money, but not much. And so, he had to get to work. And so what they did, and actually it's my husband feels like this next piece I'm going to tell you is what saved them. they had a community where they, of Holocaust survivors, all from Poland, who had survived. And most of them also had broken families. Most of their families had been destroyed. So they became each other's support system and family. And my mother said we could just be together and we didn't have to say anything. We just knew. We just knew about what each other had gone through. And, so they had parties and birthday parties for the kids. And they actually formed an organization, and they would raise money for this orphanage and do good deeds. And my mother said, you always have to help others. That was her big thing. You can't just accumulate for yourself. You have to take care of yourself, but you have to help others. And so I did grow up with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was really, I can't believe what a nice guy he was.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he ever hit me in my whole life. He never hit us.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't a disciplinarian. My mother was,
Yeah.
She more, yelled, come on,
Yeah.
She didn't do a lot of hitting either, but just that he was so kind, and he just loved his friends, and he loved to play cards with his friends, and and they made a life. But I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think they were just so busy with life, and their way of having that grief, it was to be with these other survivors.
Yeah.
That was their community.
Yeah. And that speaks to group support and peer groups and
Yeah.
that type. And your
Yes.
husband is right. Yeah. Being able to not even say a word, but you could just look at somebody and know what's happening. And you don't even have to address it in that moment, but you just know you're connected in that way. So that is powerful.
Isn't that like with your Sunday group at your church? It's kind of like I read your mind. So it's you've got that powerful group that that you're connected to each other and you support each other, and that's so, like you said, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Did you start that group, or how did that happen?
A lady from our church who is a counselor started the group back in 2001. And my dad and my mother at the time, they joined in to be facilitators back in 2002. So I would kind of hang out with them on Sunday evening. And that's how it started, because, we had a string of people at the church who had passed away at that time. And we felt like that wasn't, or they felt like that grief recovery or support groups is something that would be beneficial. So
Mhm.
fast forward, I moved to Virginia. My dad continued to facilitate with someone else. And when I came back home in 2014, I decided that to change the date, don't do it on a Sunday, do it on a Wednesday before church. We would have Wednesday service. So I started to do Wednesday. So right after work, I would leave work because it was right down the street from church, and I would do grief recovery. That it's called Griefshare. So it's a program and it's very structured. So I was able to do that with a friend of mine who had lost her husband, and she was in there with her family for a few months. And since 2014, I have been doing that consistently. Now,
Wow.
COVID happened, of course, and we were no longer in church. But even though that's very bittersweet, it's been very tragic. However, Zoom has helped so much with Griefshare because we have more participants, and people have been very much consistent for the past almost 2 years, have been very consistent in coming to Griefshare
Okay.
on Zoom. And then we have people from other states that are coming in and sharing, and other churches coming in. So it has been powerful. So my dad's on there still with me, and we have now
wonderful.
for other people, for other facilitators. So it's been very helpful. So I've been doing that work for now 8 years or 7 years.
Yep, good for you. That's the whole thing. And so now you're having that impetus that you want to do more work with grief and loss.
Most
Well, if you, like I said earlier, it's the foundation of all of us human beings. We are, whether it's losing a relationship, a friend, a job, even our health,
yeah,
you know, we're all going to go through something.
yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because we have been going through so much in the past almost 2 years. Grieving a medical diagnosis is a lot. And I know someone specifically who is grieving the loss of their, I guess when you get a medical diagnosis, you realize that you're no longer 25 years old. You're much older now. Could you talk to me a little bit about people who are grieving, I guess, good health, or no longer having to worry about, I guess their health. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and how that works?
Well, you know, like I said earlier, everyone's going to be on their journey and do it differently. But I think there are some common things. Is like, first, there's that question, why me?
Yeah.
Why? I've tried to be a good person. I tried to do, whether I'm a counselor or a worker in a restaurant, or it doesn't matter. The question is, why is this happening to me? So there's that stage that we have to, until we get to acceptance, is, a journey. I don't know what, people have different beliefs about. Some people think it's, they've caused it or this or that, but it's like acknowledging that something is going on, and that all you can do is if you're into the medical model, is to get help and to try to do the best you can, and to rest, and to look at your life and say, what can I let go of so that I can concentrate on regaining some health. So
it sounds like the same process when you lose someone, you kind of go through those thoughts and emotions and feelings until you get to an acceptance place. And like in your poem, it's not that the journey is over. It's just that you've realized that life is still going on, and you're still
exactly. I think the only other thing I would think of, like when you have a medical issue, and that's changing your life, is that there's the grief for your lost part of you and your life. Like, let's say you were a really good athlete, and now you can't do that. So you're grieving the fact that your life as you knew it is over. And so how do you embrace what's ahead of you? How do you learn how to take care of yourself and yet reach out, that your life isn't over yet, but you have challenges. So support is good.
Support is always good.
Good.
Just reaching out, because there's always help, and there's always somebody else that has gone through what you're going through. It's not, new. It might be new to you, but there's others that have gone through it and can definitely give you the ropes.
I watched something about your parents. Obviously, I don't know them, but I do know that they lost a son.
Yes.
And the fact that they got involved with this grief group is just so touching to me, because it's really the later generations that are becoming more open about talking about their feelings and their losses. Now, I don't know how old your parents are. They're probably younger than I am, but I just say to go through something devastating like that, and to reach out to help themselves and then also help others, is just truly and amazing. So
it is.
They're good people.
Thank you. They are good people. I think I have some of that has rubbed a lot off on my dad, who has been consistent with the group. And
Mhm.
I remember telling him something very hard recently, and his first response was, "I am sorry this is happening to you." And I said, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." Because,
'Cause
yeah, because
he
you know
didn't
how
rush.
men are.
Yeah, he didn't rush in to kind of do this, do that, do this, do that. He just said, he just did he just supported you.
Yeah. And it shook me a little bit.
You thought he was gonna go, like, now come on, you can do this or whatever, but he
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. Yes. So I'm thinking, man, I think between this group and my conversations with you, I think I'm raising a counselor here. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's, yeah,
So it
so,
was good. It was good. So I appreciate that. It has been eye opening for a lot of people, and I know individuals from our church and even individuals outside of our church know that it's a safe place. And when we go to work, sometimes it's not a safe place to talk about or to even
that's,
emote.
mhm. Right.
Yeah.
You have to be careful who you share with. You're right. Because not everyone has the ability to hold, your feelings without either being judgmental or thinking that they have to give you advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
That advice giving. Oh my God,
Yes.
when when you're in grief, all you want is love and kindness, right? And support.
Yes. Yes. And I've talked about insensitive comments before on my Sibling Loss podcast. But what insensitive comments or advice have you heard, I guess, lately?
Um, well, I haven't had it directed at me, but I've had people tell me, like there's like I think when people are still sad after a year, people are sometimes surprised. People who haven't experienced a big loss, and they think that they should be okay.
Yeah.
And what really happens is, like, in year two, you really realize that that person is not going to be there at the holidays. You're not going to be able to call them for their birthday. I mean, in the first year, you're kind of in a daze and you're kind of trying to figure it out. And I think you have magical thinking that somehow you keep thinking you're going to see them or hear from them. The second year, I think it really hits that, no, this person's gone. They're gone as we know it. We don't know what happens afterwards, but we know on this planet they're gone, and we're not going to see them again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So get through that year, the first, that second.
yeah, and so I guess what back to your question is, the main thing is that, please, if you know somebody who's grieving, just don't be judgmental about their process, and just be kind.
Mhm. Yeah,
Kindness underrated in our country.
it is.
Just be thoughtful. Care that they're going through something.
Yeah. Even if you don't understand what that's about,
Yeah,
that hasn't been your journey.
yeah, a good point. Even if it's not your journey, you don't understand. Just know that they're going through something, and they're not going to get over it quickly. If they truly love that person,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
not going to get over it quickly.
Yeah, definitely. So what would be your advice? And I'm not going to keep you too long, but what would be your advice for grief in the workplace?
Oh, so, like, let's say there's someone dies either by natural causes, or someone comes in, something happens with it, someone dies. Um, I, there have been workplaces where they actually will call, in California here. There have been a couple of places that have called out to hospice, and they've had grief counselors come in and talk with people. Like, because sometimes people die and it's a shock, it's sudden, or maybe they didn't know someone was ill, or sometimes people die of a heart attack suddenly and there's no warning. So if I haven't done this in a long time, but I was called out to a school that was a Catholic school where one of the substitute teachers had killed herself. And so I went out with two other counselors, and we talked with the teachers and the principal. And then we were able to, any kids that wanted to talk about their feelings about what happened. And the principal was really, really good, because she set the tone. She said, this person was emotionally upset. She did this because she had no hope, and we're not going to judge her. Because, in the earlier days in religions, they did ostracize people who committed suicide, and she wasn't having any of that. And so she invited, so that helped, that people could talk about how sad they were that this teacher didn't feel she had anyone she could talk to. So that's an example of what you can do in a workplace. You can call your local hospice and see if they have grief counselors that will come out. Talk with people.
And it's important for supervisors, like the principal. It's important for supervisors to be able to give that time and give that space for their employees, for students, to be able to have, so they can express their shock. They can express all the things that they're feeling, not just one time, but, for when they need it.
Yeah, that would be ideal, and I don't know if every workplace would be willing to do that, but at least if they introduce you to this, and then if the grief counselors say, if you need more, this is where we are, and this is our availability, or there are people out in the community who do this kind of work, it would be helpful,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Just something that we can't ignore, and we can't ignore it now, because we know as a collective we've gone through a lot in these 2 years.
Exactly. Yes.
Not just COVID, but people have gotten sick and died. People have died by suicide. People have died by accidents, homicide. We've had all of that wrapped up into our collective grief.
Exactly. Well put. Yes.
Yeah.
Collective
grief. So now I feel as though it's everybody's responsibility to be able to grab or understand what grief is like, but to also provide a resource if you don't know, or to be able to be, like you said earlier, kind.
And I hope over time that we'll have more conversations about death.
Yeah. And
hide it, because we're not going to get out of this lifetime alive. We don't know when, but this is something, we're all mortals. We're not going to live forever. And making it more acceptable. This is, I'm a lot older than you. I just turned 71 this month. And, and I'm 80 or something, because I can do that as a counselor. I can, just cut back on my days as I get more tired. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. I am going to let you know which one so far is my favorite, one of your poems in the book, and it's page 33. Grief runs us ragged.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got to pick. Oh, I turned right to it. That's weird.
Oh, it was divine. So could you read that one for me too?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Grief runs us ragged. Grief runs us ragged, cracks our hearts open, leaves us on the floor of our despair, wondering, will we ever feel normal? Asking questions like why and when, how could this be, why me? Grief will come to all of us at some time in our life. We will swim with the waves, get knocked down, but over time we will stand up to rise again. because that is what life does to us. It makes us start all over again.
Yes. Oh my goodness. That one spoke to me immediately.
Oh, well, thank you. That's pleases me. I'm so glad that it does. When I found out, see, I didn't know that you had lost your brother. And when I found out about that you had that sibling loss, I saw something in your post. That's when and then I asked you, is it okay? I wanted to send you this book.
Oh, wow.
Because, yeah, that's how that came about.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And I will be sharing some of your words on Facebook. And I'll ask your permission to write some things because I am now launching my side private practice. And it is going to be grief counseling focused. And of course, we know that grief doesn't just always involve death, but
Right.
mainly it will be about death. But I wanted to just to let you know that, yeah, this is going to help me and a lot of clients. So let me know how I can grab more copies of your book.
Well, it's on Amazon.
Oh, good.
And I asked the person that formatted this and put this, and sent it on I said, I don't want it to cost a lot of money. I want people it to be available. So it's on sale on Amazon for $7.95.
Wow.
I wanted $10 so that, for some people that's still a lot of money, but for people that wanted it, that they could afford it.
Yes. So if you know someone out there who needs words, like when they're up at night, they can't sleep, or in the morning, or any time of the day, but when you're having one of those quiet moments and you just need some time to meditate on your journey, I suggest reading these book of poems because it does speak to the very delicacies of what you're going through. It may give you the words that you don't have yet, because a lot of times that's what grief support does. It gives us the words. It gives us the feelings, and attaching the feelings to the words that sometimes we can't even get to at the time because everything is jumbled in our minds and jumbled in our hearts. So this can give you the words and the expression of what you're going through at the time.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you. Thank you for using your words to make it to where it becomes beautiful for us. Because it's not always beautiful. And that's why I was drawn to this one, because it does drag us. But that journey, we come from being dragged to possibly guiding other people through this journey.
Yeah, I found out when I was involved in hospice for the 10 years that I was, from 1990 to 2000, there were people who were volunteers or even became counselors who had a tremendous loss and found, they had to have time. They didn't become volunteers right away, but after a certain amount of years, they became volunteers. And in fact, one of the ladies who co-facilitated the bereavement, the Survivors of Suicide group, she had a son who killed himself at age 17, and she never got, she didn't get over it. She said she never did Christmas again. She would go to a movie by herself, even 10 years later, or 20 years. So she was a very effective facilitator. I was the person with the license, and she was the person who knew firsthand what that meant. So yeah, using those experiences, just like you know what it's like to lose a sibling.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's one of the hardest journeys I have been on thus far. I know keep living, but it's one of those hardest journeys that I would ever go through at this time. And
Right.
To be able to empathize with other siblings has been has been good for me, especially those who are just starting the journey and have been in the journey maybe 5-10 years.
Right.
And, with me being 24 in and not knowing back in the day about grief counseling or therapy, or not even having that option at 14 years old, and then going through how grief manifests itself inside my body, and being able to guide other siblings and people who are in grief, that grief does manifest its way in other ways if we are not taking care of it, if we are not doing our work.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Well, any last words before we close out for today? And I'll let you go about your Saturday because it is early.
yes, you too. First of all, I appreciate having this conversation with you. You're a beautiful young woman. I call you a young woman because I'm 71, so I get to call you.
Thank you.
I look forward to many more years of talking on Facebook with each other, sharing, and God bless you and your family. You're a beautiful addition to your community, and I say that from my heart. I just feel very touched by you and your story. So
Thank you for meeting with me. It was 9:00 when we started my time, but 7:00 California time where Frieda is. So she is early bird.
yeah, I was. So I'm an early bird.
Yeah. What time do you wake up normally?
Around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But I need a nap.
Yes, I feel you. And hey, if you want to, again, go find her book on Amazon. It's called Riding the Waves of Grief. So this is not going to be the last time you hear us having a conversation. Prayerfully, hopefully we'll have more in the future. And again, I appreciate you for meeting with me finally, and for us to be able to hear your story, because there's a lot of history wrapped up into this, a lot of things that we can take and use for our clients and for ourselves. So I appreciate you, and I know to lead with love and kindness no matter where I go. And you have solidified that more for me.
Okay. You have a beautiful day and weekend.
Thank you.
I'll see you online.